Beneath Oregon's moss-draped forests, beyond its mist-choked coastlines and shadowed lakes, something ancient stirs. Not one thing, many. Creatures whispered about in tribal legends, lumberjack lies, and roadside murmurs. Some fly, some crawl, some knock. None want to be found. This isn't a state, it's a haunted map, and every inch tells a story you were never meant to hear. So light a fire, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't answer the knock in the dark. These are 30 terrifying mythical creatures of Oregon, and one of them is already watching. Before we dive into the shadows, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's lurking in the next forest or under your bed. And hey, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. Let's see who else is awake with us and who shouldn't be. 1. Sasquatch, Bigfoot. The first thing you hear isn't the crunch of pine needles underfoot or the distant echo of an owl. It's silence, the kind that presses into your eardrums and makes your heartbeat feel like an intrusion. Welcome to the deep forests of Oregon, where the trees keep secrets older than the state itself, and something large is always just behind the next ridge. Not a bear, not a man, something in between. They call it Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti of the Pacific Northwest. It goes by many names, but in Oregon, it's less a question of if it's out there and more of why it hasn't shown itself, or worse, what it's waiting for. Reports span the entire state: the moss-draped Coast Range, the volcanic spine of the Cascades, the stark ridgelines of the Blue Mountains. All hold a piece of the puzzle. Hunters returning from trips with more questions than game, hikers who swear the woods rearrange themselves behind them, families waking up at 3:12 a.m. to rhythmic thumping beyond their backyard fence. 3 knocks, always 3, as if something is listening for a reply. The footprints are the least weird part. You've probably seen them already. Massive impressions in mud or snow, larger than any human foot, wider than any bear's. Casts line shelves in small-town museums, from Boring to La Grande. But those prints aren't proof. They're just bait. The real evidence lives in the liminal space between denial and obsession. Blurry footage, panicked voice memos, and the eerie fact that dozens of cultures across centuries and continents describe something almost exactly the same, and yet scientists have never confirmed anything. No bones, no body, no DNA sample untainted by hoax or contamination, nothing that would make a biologist clear their throat on PBS and say, yes, we were wrong. There's a 9-foot ape roaming the Pacific Northwest, but the locals don't need peer-reviewed papers. In timber towns and reservation circles, Sasquatch isn't fiction, it's tradition. Some call it a protector, others a predator. Some claim they've locked eyes with it. Deep, dark, intelligent eyes, like it knew you were going to be there before you did. There are tales of mothers told by their grandmothers not to wander past the cedar grove at twilight, not because of wolves, but because the woods had a watcher. Then there are the theories. Oh, the theories. Bigfoot is a relic gigantopithecus. Bigfoot is a government experiment gone rogue. Bigfoot is a shape-shifting interdimensional being that steps between worlds in the fog. And that's not even the weirdest one. Some say Bigfoot is simply what happens when the forest itself decides to look back. But maybe the most chilling thought is this: what if it's not hiding? What if we're just not worth the reveal? A species that lights fires, cuts roads, and tells ourselves bedtime stories about the monsters we used to be. Maybe Bigfoot isn't some undiscovered animal. Maybe it's the part of us that stayed behind. Hairier, hungrier, less interested in concrete. And if that sounds like nonsense, just remember this: the forest is full of eyes. Some are squirrels, some are owls, and some know your name before you ever step off the trail. Which brings us to a darker version of that legend, the one where the wild man isn't just watching from the shadows, but whispering in the dark. The Seatco, Stick Indians, forest spirits who don't just observe, they lure. 2. Sietko, stick Indians. If Sasquatch is Oregon's guardian myth, shaggy, distant, almost noble, the Sietko are its opposite. What happens when the woods decide to mock you? Their name comes from Chinookan tongues, roughly meaning bad people, though every translation feels too polite. The Sieko are not ghosts or beasts, but something that lives between both, the echo of human cruelty turned feral and free. Imagine the forest at night. The trees creak with slow, humid breath. The wind carries sounds that aren't quite animal, laughter maybe, or a baby crying where no baby should be. It's the sort of sound that makes your chest tighten, that primal panic you can't explain. That's where the stick Indians are said to live, not deep in the forest, everywhere the shadows grow too thick to trust. The stories stretch from the coast to the Cascades, especially along old Tillamook and Chinookan trails. Tribes use the legends as warnings. Do not wander alone after dark. Do not answer voices calling your name. Do not whistle back when the trees whistle first. The Sietko, it was said, enjoy games. They mimic the cries of the lost, the laughter of friends, the call of your hunting partner. They lead you off trail, not to kill you necessarily, but to make you vanish in a way no one can explain. Some storytellers say they're spirits of those who broke taboos, cannibals, tricksters, thieves, forever bound to the forest as punishment. Others think they're a type of corrupted people, humans who stayed too long in the wild until they became part of it. Their skin took on bark tones, their eyes lost color. They learned to move without sound, to vanish between the ferns the way smoke disappears into air. Every tribe has its own version, but they share the same moral spine. The forest watches how you behave. Mock it, take from it, or enter it without respect, and something will start whispering your name in the wrong voice. That's the moment you realize the Sietko are not monsters from a different world. They're reminders from this one. Early loggers and settlers who moved into the coastal hills claimed they heard wood knocking at night, a slow, deliberate rhythm that echoed through the valleys. They thought it was Bigfoot at first, but the locals had a different warning. If it knocks, don't knock back. The Sietkas are conversational predators. Once you answer, they follow the sound home. Some anthropologists have tried to rationalize it. They say the stories reflect natural dangers, cliffs, swamps, storms, no personified to keep children safe. That's a neat explanation until you meet someone who swears they've heard them. A Tillamook elder once told a researcher, if you think they're just stories, go whistle alone in the woods. They'll whistle back once. And there's the terrifying ambiguity. Are they ghosts of the past or something far more literal? Ancient stories describe them with glowing eyes and long fingers. Modern witnesses describe flickers of movement, laughter on the wind, and the feeling that something is following too close. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe the forest still keeps its old tenants. What makes the Sietko so disturbing isn't what they do. It's what they remind us of. That fear was once useful, that the wild doesn't care about your flashlight or phone signal. Every time someone disappears without a trace in Oregon's wooded miles, no struggle, no clues, people quietly revive the old word. They say you can't see a Sietko head on. You only catch the side of its grin, like a reflection in running water. A face that looks almost human until it isn't. And just when you think the forest is done playing tricks, the storm clouds gather above the coastal ridges and thunder rolls like wings unfurling, because somewhere high above those same trees, something far larger is watching, a creature older than thunder itself. The tribes call it Thunderbird. If you're still here after that, welcome to the deep end. We've barely scratched the mossy surface, and it only gets stranger from here. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss what's waiting deeper in the trees. And while you're here, tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? I'm curious who else is wandering the woods with us this late. 3. Thunderbird. Before the storm hits, there's a stillness, not peace, anticipation. The trees don't sway. The air holds its breath. Birds fall silent and the sky forgets what color it's supposed to be. That's when you know the thunderbird is near. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. According to generations of indigenous stories from the Oregon coast and beyond, the thunderbird is not just a spirit, it's a presence, a force with wings wide enough to block out the sun, a cry loud enough to split the sky, and a vendetta old enough to carry continents of meaning. It's not a bird in the ordinary sense, it's the storm itself given form. The Tillamook, the Chinook, the Kalapuya, and other tribes of the region tell of this immense winged being who lives in the mountains but visits the coast to do battle with ancient enemies. Its flapping wings make thunder, its blinking eyes flash lightning, and its preferred prey is something even worse. In one of the oldest stories, the thunderbird battles a monstrous whale, not a peaceful, poetic leviathan, but a creature of imbalance, something that devours entire coastlines and leaves ecosystems shattered. The fight, they say, was so epic, it carved valleys, shook the sea, and may have even formed the jagged coastal cliffs we see today. Scientists might call that plate tectonics, but that's missing the point, because what Thunderbird represents isn't just weather, it's consequence. In the stories, Thunderbird doesn't attack without reason. It's a guardian and a destroyer, balancing nature by force. Too much heat, it brings the storm. Too much greed, it brings the flood. Too many people walking the earth like they own it, it brings a reminder. Some say Thunderbird is male. Some say female. Some say it doesn't matter. It's not a person, it's a phenomenon. But every story agrees. It's not to be seen casually. When people do claim to spot something enormous soaring above the coastal mountains, it's always just for a second, a shadow that doesn't belong, a silhouette too big for any known bird. Sometimes it has feathers like daggers or eyes that glow white in the dark sky. Sometimes its wings are silent. Sometimes they sound like a drum beat from nowhere. There have been sightings well into the 20th century. Farmers outside Tillamook reporting livestock vanishing after a storm. Campers along the coastal range waking to find deep, impossible talon marks on nearby trees. In the 1940s, a group of loggers near Neahkani Mountain swore they saw a bird the size of a plane disappear into the clouds. They laughed about it later, but none of them went back to that ridge. The modern world tries to retrofit Thunderbird into familiar categories: a surviving Terratornis, a mutant condor, a prehistoric relic from some inaccessible canyon. It's almost cute the way people need it to be biological, taxonomic, something that fits neatly into a documentary voiceover. But Thunderbird doesn't play by documentary rules. It doesn't want to be filmed. It wants to be understood, which is more dangerous, because maybe Thunderbird isn't a creature at all. Maybe it's a message, a sentient force that shows up when the balance tips too far, when the land groans from pressure and the air feels heavy with human arrogance. It doesn't kill out of malice, it just corrects. And if that seems too poetic for your taste, consider this. We're building cities faster than the clouds can form. We're draining rivers that used to flow freely to the sea. The whale's return might not be far off, and if it is, Thunderbird won't be far behind. Of course, not every monster in Oregon is from the skies or myths carved in petroglyphs. Some live in the water. Others linger off the coast, just beneath the waves, where sailors once saw something slithering through the fog. Its name? Colossal Claude. 4. Colossal Claude. It began, as many Oregon legends do, with fog, thick coastal fog, the kind that blurs your headlights and makes ocean and sky indistinguishable. Somewhere near the mouth of the Columbia River, not far from Astoria, sailors started seeing it, a shape, a shadow, a neck too long for comfort, and a body too sinuous to be explained away by driftwood or sea lions. It moved with intent, they said. It watched. They called it Colossal Claude. The name sounds like something out of a comic strip, something goofy, maybe charming, but there's nothing charming about what people have described. Claude, if it exists, is a sea serpent, 20 to 40 feet long, with a serpentine body, a horse-like head, and undulating movements that break the surface like rolling thunder. It first made headlines in the 1930s when crew members aboard a Columbia River lightship claimed they saw a creature trailing the vessel for days. They weren't the only ones. Throughout the 40s and 50s, Claude became an unofficial maritime celebrity. Tugboat crews, Coast Guard operators, and commercial fishermen and all reported something massive surfacing along the Columbia River Bar, an area already notorious as the graveyard of the Pacific. Known for its shifting sandbars, unpredictable weather, and deadly currents, the river mouth doesn't need any help being ominous. But Claude adds a certain flavor, something ancient, something watching. Eyewitnesses described a creature with a long neck, the head of a camel, and skin like an overgrown eel. It would sometimes breach, sometimes simply ripple beneath the water, but it always vanish before anyone could get a clear look. In 1963, the crew of the Shell Oil Company claimed to have captured something on film, a blurry, bobbing shape that disappeared as quickly as it came. The footage, of course, was inconclusive. Like all good sea monster footage, it raised more eyebrows than it answered questions, and so Claude remains in limbo. Cryptozoologists continue to reference him as a staple of Pacific Northwest marine mystery. Skeptics say the sightings are misidentified sea lions or rotting whale carcasses moving with the tides, but those explanations don't fully account for the consistency of the reports or the unease that comes with them, because this isn't just one fisherman seeing something strange after too many beers. It's dozens of professionals over decades reporting the same slinking shape in roughly the same location. There's something oddly respectful about the way locals talk about Claude. He's not a villain, not a threat, just a reminder that the ocean is not ours, that there are places, even within our own state borders, that remain wild in a way we'll never fully domesticate. For every GPS dot and sonar ping, the sea just smiles and shrugs. Claude, like the Columbia itself, is a moving boundary between what we know and what we merely suspect. And yet, he's not alone. Claude might be the most famous, but he's part of a larger pattern. Oregon has a long, damp tradition of lake and sea monsters that defy explanation. Some stories are old as river stones, others born at the bottom of a beer can, but they all agree on one thing. Something moves beneath the water, and it doesn't care what you believe. Just inland, tucked beside Lincoln City, another lake hides another serpent. Less known, perhaps, but just as persistent. They call it the Devil's Lake Monster. 5. Devil's Lake Monster. The name does most of the heavy lifting. Devil's Lake. You could write it off as just another ominous label stuck onto a perfectly nice patch of water in Lincoln City, an overreaction to some fog, or a leftover superstition from old settlers. But Oregon doesn't give names like that casually. And the stories that drift around Devil's Lake have a certain persistence, like the smell of brine, like something watching from beneath the dock. The lake itself is not that big, just over 600 acres, calm, picturesque, hugged by vacation homes and parkland. On most days it looks exactly like what it is, a quiet inland lake, just a stone's throw from the Pacific. Paddleboarders skim across it. Fishermen cast lines in silence. Children splash in the shallows. Everything's normal until it isn't, because if you ask the locals, really ask them, they'll tell you not everything about Devil's Lake adds up. Fish vanish, dogs refuse to swim, and every so often someone sees something long, slithering, just beneath the surface, not fast, not aggressive, just present and far too large to belong there. The earliest known references to a monster in Devil's Lake go back to local native legends, though the specifics are harder to pin down. Some say the land tribes of the region, possibly the Silex or Tillamook peoples, avoided the lake entirely, believing it to be cursed or inhabited by an evil spirit. Others say it was a sacred site, watched over by a powerful water being best left undisturbed. What's agreed upon is that the lake has always been treated as different, unsettling, even when beautiful. In the 20th century, the stories took on a more modern form. Locals reported a serpentine creature, 30 to 40 feet long, gliding through the center of the lake. Descriptions vary wildly. Some claim a crocodilian snout. Others insist on a horse-like head, not unlike colossal clods. A few reports mention glowing eyes, though that detail always seems suspiciously convenient. What's consistent is the sense of wrongness, that something is living in the water that doesn't belong there, and that it's old, not ancient like a dinosaur, ancient like a rumor passed down so many times that even the liars start to believe it. Skeptics, of course, are quick to dismiss it. Floating logs, wakes from boats, gas bubbles. There's even a theory about sturgeon, those prehistoric fish that sometimes grow to unexpected lengths in inland lakes. But the people who've seen it, they don't shrug it off. They remember it, not as something they think they saw, but as something they can't explain, something that stared back. The strangest part? The sightings haven't stopped. In fact, with the rise of smartphones and drone footage, more videos than ever have surfaced, though none conclusive, blurry shapes, water ripples. One video, filmed from a rental cabin and in 2019, shows something massive submerging near a group of geese. The birds fly off, the ripples don't fade for nearly 2 minutes. So what lives in Devil's Lake? Nobody knows. But if it's anything like its cousins in the Columbia or Crater Lake, it's not just biology, it's mythos, a living contradiction, something that shouldn't exist but does because we keep believing in it. And maybe belief is the real food source, because east of Lincoln City, tucked in Oregon's northeastern mountains, another lake hides another Leviathan, this one with a name, a fan base, and just enough mystery to make you check the water twice. They call him Wally, the Wallowa Lake Monster. 6. Wally, the Wallowa Lake Monster. If you stand at the edge of Wallowa Lake in northeastern Oregon, just as the sun is dipping behind the mountains, it feels like a place too beautiful for monsters. The glacial lake lies in a bowl carved by ice and time, flanked by snow-dusted peaks that seem permanently frozen in reflection. It's the kind of place where people come to unwind, retire, or start over, not the kind of place where something long, ancient, and unblinking stares up at you from the depths. And yet, here we are. Locals call it Wally, a name that sounds more like a cartoon sidekick than a cryptid, but behind that nickname is a story with teeth. Wally is said to be a massive, serpentine creature that lives somewhere in the deeper stretches of Wallowa Lake, a body of water that sinks to a depth of nearly 300 feet. That's deep enough to hide anything, or everything. The legend is less documented than other Oregon cryptids. There are no famous expedition failures, no grainy black and white photographs with hand-drawn arrows, but there are stories, consistent ones, from fishermen, campers, tourists. They speak of a strange shape gliding just below the surface, a long, snake-like form that doesn't match the lake's known wildlife. Trout don't make wakes like that, otters don't grow to 20 feet, and logs don't swim against the current. What's interesting is how quietly the legend persists. It's not a tourist trap. There's no Wally gift shop or themed paddle boat rides, just the occasional mention in local papers, cryptid blogs, and whispered campfire retellings. It's like the town collectively decided to acknowledge the monster without exploiting it, which in a way only makes it feel more real. After all, the monsters people commercialize often fade into kitsch. The ones people respect, those are the ones you keep an eye on. Wallowa Lake's geography makes the story harder to dismiss. Its glacial origins mean its bottom is steep and dark, with cold, oxygen rich water that could theoretically sustain something large and elusive. Sonar tests have occasionally picked up anomalies, and in 2002, a local fishing guide claimed he saw something massive pass beneath his boat, too fast, too controlled to be debris. He said he didn't tell anyone for a year. Not because I was scared, he explained, because I didn't want it to go away. That might be Wally's greatest trick, its emotional footprint. Unlike other cryptids that stoke fear or thrill seeking, Wally seems to inspire a strange mix of reverence and melancholy. It's not the monster you run from, it's the one you wonder about, the one you almost see in the early morning mist and kind of hope never gets caught. Of course, that doesn't mean people haven't tried. There have been a few quiet attempts to investigate the legend, low budget sonar sweeps, GoPro equipped fishing expeditions, even a half hearted dive attempt in the 2010s. But Wallowa Lake, like all good lakes, keeps its secrets cold and still. In a world that wants to label and measure everything, Wally remains stubbornly vague, too specific to be coincidence, too elusive to be confirmed, just visible enough to haunt the imagination. And the most unsettling part, Wally isn't even Oregon's only aquatic enigma with a serpentine twist, because farther south and slightly offshore, another creature slinks through the Pacific currents, one that's far more famous, far more frequently cited, and possibly far less alone. Say hello to Cadborosaurus, better known as Caddy. 7. Cadborosaurus, Caddy, on the Oregon coast. They call it Caddy, short for Cadborosaurus, a name that sounds like it belongs in a museum next to dusty bones and a stern docent. But Caddy isn't a fossil. It's a living rumor, a slithering sea serpent that has been spotted all along the Pacific Northwest coastline from British Columbia to the foggy breakers off the Oregon shore. And despite what skeptics claim, the creature just keeps showing up, not in fairy tales, but in fishing logs, eyewitness interviews, and the panicked radio calls of people who really didn't want to believe what they were seeing. Caddy is the classic sea monster, long, undulating body, humps that rise and fall rhythmically in the water, a neck that stretches too far for comfort, often topped with a horse-like or camel-like head. It's not elegant, it's unsettling, something that looks like it belongs to an era before humans, swimming through an ocean that never stopped belonging to itself. Most people associate Caddy with Canadian waters, especially the area around Cadboro Bay, hence the name. But what gets glossed over is how frequently this creature appears farther south, off Oregon's coast. From Florence to Coos Bay, from Newport to the sea stacks of Bandon, sightings crop up like salt-weathered postcards from another world, always the same, a shape too long, a movement too fluid, a presence that doesn't match anything in the local marine catalog. Fishermen are the most common witnesses, not cryptid hunters, not thrill-seeking teens, people whose livelihoods depend on knowing the difference between an eel, a seal, and a sea-born something else. In 1997, a crabber off the coast near Charleston swore he watched a massive, dark creature rise and dip below the waves for nearly 5 minutes. It had vertical undulations, unlike whales, and moved like it was swimming with a purpose. When he reported it, he was laughed at, but not by everyone. There are old tribal stories from coastal nations, stories of long water serpents that guarded the sea and sometimes came ashore during great storms. These stories don't use the name Cadborosaurus, of course, but the descriptions are eerily familiar, and they hint at something more than just an unexplained animal. They describe personality, a kind of ancient awareness, a sea creature that doesn't just exist, but watches. As with most cryptids, modern science tries to tidy things up. It was a giant oarfish, they say, or a line of seals. Sometimes it's even suggested to be swimming debris. You can hear the forced calm in those explanations, like a teacher trying to rationalize a scream in the hallway during a test. Because the truth is, no one has ever captured caddy, no one has studied it, and yet somehow everyone knows what it looks like. Some marine biologists have started to quietly wonder if something like Cadborosaurus could be a deep diving marine reptile, something that evaded extinction and now thrives in the unexplored corners of the Pacific, with nearly 80% of the world's oceans still uncharted. It's not the most ridiculous theory on the table. It just happens to live in a category we pretend doesn't exist, things we haven't caught yet. And if you're wondering whether caddy's just one creature or part of a species, you're not alone. Because if multiple people across centuries and coastlines are seeing the same thing, maybe there's more than one, which brings us back to the coast of Oregon, more specifically, the pullouts near Cannon Beach. Because the next creature in the lineup doesn't slither through the waves, he shambles, wrapped in bloodied gauze, trailing stench and confusion, and almost always spotted by teenagers in cars. They call him the Bandage Man. 8. Bandage Man. The thing about Cannon Beach is that it feels too quaint for terror. It's the kind of place that sells saltwater taffy, not existential dread. Tourists stroll barefoot across the sand, pose beside Haystack Rock, and eat overpriced seafood while seafoam tickles their shoes. But if you wander just outside the postcard, off the beach, into the pine-shrouded pullouts along Old Highway 101, you might start to hear whispers about a different kind of local attraction. They call him the Bandage Man. And no, he's not part of a ghost tour. He's part of the stories that locals don't tell loudly, because when they do, the forest seems to lean in. At first glance, the Bandage Man sounds like a lazy urban legend, a mummy in flannel country, a wrapped-up figure stumbling through the woods and appearing in the rearview mirrors of unsuspecting drivers. But the details make it stranger and harder to ignore. The most common version goes like this. Two teenagers are parked on a coastal turnout, usually late at night, the kind of place where the wind howls louder than the radio. Everything's quiet. Then, without warning, a thump on the trunk, or the roof, or the side of the car. They turn, expecting an animal. Instead, they see him, a figure covered in what looks like rotting medical gauze, moving in jerks, like something that forgot how joints work. And sometimes, he's already inside the car. That part tends to vary. Sometimes he's just peering through the fogged-up window. Sometimes he vanishes before they can scream. And sometimes he's riding in the bed of a truck until the driver swerves and he's gone. No one ever sees him arrive. He just appears, wrapped head to toe in stained bandages, silent, watching, not aggressive, just present, like a bad idea that came to life. So where did he come from? Theories range from the mildly plausible to the gloriously absurd. One popular story claims he was a logger who suffered a gruesome accident in a nearby sawmill, wrapped in gauze en route to the hospital, only for the ambulance to crash and burn in the forest. He never made it out, but something did. Another version paints him as a drifter who died in a fire in the 50s. His body never recovered. A third says he's not a ghost at all, but a hoax that turned into something else, an urban legend that grew legs. The weirdest part? People still report him. Not often and never with proof, but every few years, someone stops along the road near Cannon Beach and swears they saw something in the mirror, something that shouldn't be there, something wrapped. And whether he's real, imagined, or just the forest playing tricks, he fits, because Oregon has a habit of recycling its dead. Ghosts, cryptids, spirits, they don't vanish. They change shape. They adapt, which might explain why the next creature has wings, fur, and red eyes, and yet somehow still gets called Bat Squatch. 9. Bat Squatch. On May 18th, 1980, Mount St. Helens exploded with the fury of a geological tantrum thousands of years in the making. Ash blanketed 11 states, rivers boiled, forests fell. It was the kind of apocalypse that leaves scars you can still see from orbit. And yet, out of all the wreckage, all the chaos, and all the very real trauma, something else emerged, something with wings. They call it bat squatch. Yes, it sounds ridiculous, like a parody of a cryptid, like someone threw Bigfoot and a bat into a blender and hit urban legend puree. But for the people who claim they've seen it, and there are more than a few, the name doesn't feel funny. It feels like a warning. The first major sighting happened not long after the eruption. A man in the foothills of the Cascades said he saw a creature land near his truck, a humanoid figure at least 9 feet tall, covered in bluish fur, with leathery wings stretching over a 20-foot span, red eyes, clawed feet, and a stare that made him forget how to breathe. When he blinked, it was gone. Since then, the bat squatch has become one of Oregon's most bizarre entries in the cryptid catalog. Some call it the Mothman's lumberjack cousin. Others insist it's a one-time hallucination baked into the heat of volcanic trauma, but the stories didn't stop with that first sighting. Over the years, hikers, campers, and even small plane pilots have reported something large and winged gliding silently through the mountain skies, sometimes at twilight, sometimes just before a storm. There's no real consistency in the details, which only adds to the confusion. Some accounts describe pointed ears and ape-like arms. Others say it had a tail. A few even claim it emitted a low, growling hum, as if it was vibrating the air around it. And always the eyes, glowing, watching, not curious, not angry, just aware. Skeptics have tried to write it off. A misidentified owl, they say, or maybe a vulture seen from the wrong angle. One particularly imaginative blog even suggested it was a rogue hang glider with an elaborate costume, but no misidentified bird hovers silently over a mountaintop while staring down a full-grown adult like it's waiting for the right moment to strike or leave. The theories naturally spiral into the absurd: a volcanic mutation, a spirit released by the eruption, a creature from a parallel dimension briefly pulled through by the magnetic chaos of the blast. None of them are provable. All of them feel oddly appropriate. And what makes Bat Squatch so unnerving isn't just the absurdity of its name or the ridiculousness of its anatomy, it's the location. It showed up after a cataclysm in a place already known for unpredictability, which makes you wonder, what else did the mountain wake up when it blew? Of course, not every creature born in the woods has wings. Some of them just refuse to die. Some of them bounce bullets and burst into flames, at least according to the old timber camps, where one very specific creature became a legend in rubbery, explosive fashion. They called it the Gumbaroo. 10. Gumbaroo. In the heart of the Tillamook Forest, where the moss clings to trees like regret, and the rain feels older than the sky, loggers once whispered about a creature that wasn't just dangerous, it was downright indestructible. They didn't name it after a terrifying predator or some ancient spirit. No, they gave it a name that sounds like it belongs in a children's book: Gumbaroo. But don't let the name fool you. This creature was the stuff of logging camp nightmares. Described as a bear-like beast with jet-black hairless skin that shone like oiled rubber, the Gumbaroo was said to be round, muscular, and weirdly shiny, like someone dipped a boulder in tar and gave it a bad attitude. Its eyes were small and piggish, its breath reeked of kerosene, and its appetite was rumored to be limitless. It didn't hunt, it devoured trees, livestock, tents, tools, anything that got in its path. But the most important detail, it couldn't be hurt. The loggers told tales of men shooting the Gumbaroo point blank with rifles, only to watch the bullets bounce off like pebbles against iron. Axes would shatter, knives would bend, even fire. the go-to solution for anything in the woods, backfired literally. According to the stories, if you tried to burn a gumbaroo, it would explode, not die, explode, taking half the forest with it. At this point, you might be thinking, that sounds made up. And you'd be right. It was, at least at first. The gumbaroo began as part of a class of creatures known as fearsome critters, mythical animals invented by North American lumberjacks in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They were a mix of folklore, inside jokes, and tall tales told around the fire to pass time in the lonely woods. But here's the strange part. The gumbaroo stuck around. Long after logging camps modernized and tall tales fell out of fashion, reports kept surfacing, not many, but enough to raise eyebrows. A shadow seen between trees, a weird, bouncing shape caught on a trail cam. One hiker near Trask Mountain claimed he found a deep, circular imprint in the mud, larger than any known animal, and a faint smell of smoke that lingered for hours. Of course, science has no patience for rubber-skinned, combustion-prone bears. Zoologists dismiss the gumbaroo as classic American folklore, right alongside the jackalope and the hoop snake. But in Oregon, where the line between myth and memory is unusually thin, the gumbaroo lives on. Not in textbooks, but in knowing glances and old warnings carved into bunkhouse beams. Don't shoot what bounces back. The gumbaroo is less about the creature itself and more about the feeling it evokes, something unnatural in a natural world, something that shouldn't exist but might simply because we needed it to. It's a metaphor made flesh and maybe rubber. And if you think that's odd, wait until you hear about Oregon's strangest cryptid hoax turned local legend, something tiny, toothy, and for a brief moment in the 1920s, the pride of a town that should have known better, introducing the one and only lava bear. 11. Lava bear. In the annals of Oregon weirdness, the lava bear holds a very specific distinction. It may be the only cryptid that started as a joke, was mistaken for science, and then somehow became both. A creature born from taxidermy, small-town ambition, and the uniquely American urge to turn the bizarre into profit. The lava bear's story begins in the early 1900s in the Klamath Basin, a harsh volcanic landscape in south-central Oregon where jagged black rock juts from the earth like ancient teeth. The region is already strange: lava tubes, ghost towns, desert forests. It feels like the kind of place where something weird should live. And for a brief moment in history, everyone agreed that something did. The legend starts with the discovery: a small bear carcass, not a cub, something fully grown but miniature, barely 2 feet tall at the shoulder. A local trapper claimed to have found it deep in a lava tube, and soon after, a taxidermist preserved it. Word spread fast. Headlines began appearing in Oregon newspapers. Lava bear baffles experts. New species in Klamath. Miniature monster found in lava bed. The creature was dubbed the lava bear, and for a short time, it was Oregon's hottest zoological mystery. Theories erupted. Some claimed it was a prehistoric holdover, a kind of Pleistocene bear species trapped and stunted in the labyrinthine lava tubes for millennia. Others thought it was an example of insular dwarfism, a known biological phenomenon where animals shrink in size due to isolated, resource-poor environments. A few said it was just a starved black bear, but no one could say for sure because, and here's the twist, there were no living specimens, just one taxidermy mount. That didn't stop enterprising locals from capitalizing on the buzz. For a time, you could visit the lava bear carcass in a small museum display. Postcards were made, souvenirs printed. Children were told to watch their toes near lava caves just in case. But as scientists eventually took a closer look, the excitement started to crumble. The specimen was almost certainly a malformed or malnourished juvenile black bear, its proportions distorted by disease or starvation. There was no species to classify, no fossil record to back it up. The lava bear as a biological creature didn't exist, and yet the stories didn't vanish. Campers still report hearing odd growls echoing from the lava tubes. Hikers in the Newberry Volcanic Monument claim to have seen something small and dark dart between the rocks, too fast, too low to the ground, and too large to be a marmot. Just last year, a trail cam near Fort Rock caught a blurry, four-legged shape in motion. It was dismissed as a raccoon, but some people weren't so sure. Maybe the lava bear was a hoax, or maybe it was a warning that nature doesn't need to be big to be terrifying. Sometimes the strangest things come in miniature, and sometimes they wait in the dark, just like the next creature buried deep beneath the bluest lake in America. Part spirit, part dragon, part punishment. The stories say it guards something ancient. It waits in Crater Lake. 12. Crater Lake, giant crawfish dragon. Crater Lake is deep, not just in the physical sense, though at nearly 2,000 feet, it is the deepest lake in the United States, but in the way that certain silences feel deep, the kind of silence that wraps around you like velvet and makes you forget the world above. A volcanic caldera filled with melted snow, the lake is so pure, so blue, so impossibly calm. It's hard to imagine anything menacing living there, but according to the Klamath people, whose ancestors have lived in the region since time began, there's something beneath that stillness, something ancient, something huge. They speak of a spirit world below the waters, ruled by a being named Lao, and they don't go to the lake to fish, not because the fish aren't there, trout and salmon were introduced decades ago, but because the water itself is considered sacred and dangerous. One of the lake's lesser known legends is that of a giant crawfish, or depending on who's telling it, a dragon like creature said to dwell near the base of Wizard Island, a volcanic cone that rises from the lake's surface like the tip of a sunken mountain. This creature is described as having armored scales, claws large enough to crush a canoe, and eyes that glow like embers in the dark. In some versions, the creature is a servant of Yao, the underworld spirit. In others, it is Yao himself, taking monstrous form to protect the depths of the lake. Either way, it's not just a predator, it's a guardian, a being that punishes those who approach with the wrong intent. There are stories of canoes vanishing without a sound, of strange whirlpools appearing out of nowhere, of people who went diving and came back different, quiet, hollow-eyed, as if they'd seen something that language couldn't carry. Modern sightings are rare but persistent. In 2002, a group of kayakers reported seeing something massive and dark moving below them in the crystal clear water, large enough to cast a shadow that didn't match anything known in the lake. Divers have reported sudden cold currents, unexpected turbulence, and shifting shapes at the edge of visibility. Skeptics, of course, chalk it up to optical illusions. Crater Lake's clarity is almost too good. Objects far below the surface can appear much closer than they are. Combine that with deep light refraction and a touch of folklore, and it's easy to imagine a rock formation turning into a claw or a school of fish, forming the illusion of a serpentine body. But skeptics don't explain the emotional gravity of the place. Even those who don't believe in monsters admit there's something heavy about the lake, something that makes you lower your voice, something that feels alive or at least listening. And if the giant crawfish or dragon and is just a symbol, it's a potent one, a reminder that not all depths are meant to be explored. Some are meant to be respected, especially when they're said to house entire civilizations of monsters, beings not just in the lake, but of the lake, which leads us straight into the deeper story of Yao and his lake monsters. 13. Yao and his lake monsters Crater Lake doesn't just look otherworldly, it is otherworldly. Born from the cataclysmic eruption of Mount Mazama some 7,700 years ago, it's a place formed by destruction, reborn in silence. But the still surface of that perfect blue hides a deeper story, one that predates maps, borders, or scientific measurements, a myth carved into the memory of the Klamath people who tell of a war between gods, a lake formed by grief, and monsters still swimming in the shadow of a lost volcano. At the center of the legend is Yao, a powerful spirit said to dwell beneath the mountain. In some tellings, he is the god of the underworld, a being of darkness, fire, and punishment. Above him lived Skel, the sky god, a figure of light and order. The two were not friends. According to the Klamath, their conflict was not metaphorical, it was literal, explosive, and cosmic in scale. Yao, angered by Skel's interference and enamored with a mortal woman, attempted to rise from his mountain home and assert control over the land. Skel responded with fury. What followed was a battle of titans. Fire erupted from the earth. The sky rained down destruction. Thunder cracked the mountains. The war ended with Skel casting Wow back into the depths, crushing his mountain in the process. What remained was Giwas, or Crater Lake, a wound in the earth filled with water and silence. But Yao wasn't alone when he fell. The stories say his monsters, servants, allies, or fragments of his own power remained beneath the lake. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. These lake monsters are said to guard the hidden entrances to the underworld, enforcing Yao's will and punishing those who come too close with impure hearts. Some look like serpents, some like massive crawfish. Others have no known shape, only shifting forms that ripple through the depths like sentient shadows. To this day, the Klamath people regard Crater Lake with deep reverence. It's not a recreational swimming hole, it's sacred, a portal, a warning. Traditional stories tell of medicine men visiting the rim to receive visions, but few would dare venture into the waters themselves, not because of superstition, but because of memory. The lake is not just water, it's history and it's watching. And while scientists will happily explain the geology of Crater Lake, the caldera, the volcanic activity, the clarity of its waters, they cannot explain the sensation many visitors report, a feeling of being observed from below, as if something vast and ancient is resting just beneath the surface, not asleep, just patient. In recent decades, there have been more reports, ripples in dead calm water, long shadows passing beneath boats, sudden winds that appear without warning. Most are dismissed, but every once in a while, someone looks down into that impossibly blue abyss and sees something moving, watching, waiting. And the most chilling part, those stories never end with an attack. They end with silence, as if the monsters below are waiting for something worse than fear, forgetfulness. But not all Oregon legends are monsters born of darkness. Some walk in daylight, laugh at danger, and rewire the very rules of the world. Tricksters, shapeshifters, morally flexible myth makers who turn threats into punchlines. And no one plays that role better than Coyote the Trickster. 14. Coyote the Trickster. Every culture has its trickster, that mischievous, rule-breaking, reality-bending figure who dances between chaos and creation. In Oregon's tribal traditions, that trickster is Coyote, a creature who is not quite God, not quite beast, and never, ever predictable. He's not terrifying in the way lake monsters are. He doesn't lurk or stalk. He walks beside you, smiles too wide, and ruins your plans just to see what you'll do next. And somehow you still end up thanking him. Coyote is central to the cosmology of many indigenous tribes across the Pacific Northwest, especially the Klamath, Nez Perce, Kalapuya, and Warm Springs peoples. He's not just a background character. He's the one who shaped the rivers, named the mountains, and defeated monsters that once roamed freely. He's a storyteller, a transformer, a troublemaker, and occasionally a hero by accident. He's also wildly inconsistent, which is kind of the point. In one story, Coyote is the savior of humanity, tricking a sky being into returning the sun to the people. In another, he's the fool who gets himself eaten by a monster because he wouldn't stop bragging. He dies frequently. He always comes back. Reality bends around him, and so do morals. One moment he's noble, the next petty. He lies, steals, flatters, falls in love with his own reflection, and still somehow manages to make the world better, or at least stranger. One particularly eerie tale tells of Coyote confronting a great monster that had swallowed every living creature in the valley. With nothing but a knife and a stubborn refusal to die, Coyote allows himself to be eaten and then cuts his way out, freeing everyone inside. Another time, he tricks death itself into losing track of a soul. Later, he introduces death to the world by accident while trying to impress someone. He's a god of cosmic irony. And in Oregon, that fits, because here, the wilderness doesn't just kill you, it toys with you first. And Coyote reflects that spirit perfectly. He's the logic defier, the smirking voice at the edge of the campfire that says, "Sure, go ahead. What's the worst that could happen?" Of course, many of his stories are told with a grin because laughter is part of the medicine, but underneath the humor is something deeper, a recognition that life is absurd, unpredictable, and occasionally cruel. Coyote teaches survival through flexibility. He shows that sometimes the only way to defeat a monster is to confuse it, or seduce it, or annoy it until it gives up. He's not clean, he's not virtuous, but he's necessary. And if you think Coyote's stories are just metaphor, be careful. Some say he still walks the forests, wearing a human shape, testing people's pride with strange questions and inconvenient detours, because Coyote isn't stuck in the past. Tricksters never retire, they evolve, and sometimes they leave the forest entirely, retreating into the mossy shadows and letting others do the watching. Smaller figures, stranger ones, beings who don't speak much but know far more than they should, like the elusive little people, or as the Tillamook once called them, Deetkatu. 15. Little people, Deetkatu. They go by many names, Deetkatu among the Tillamook, Stick Indians, and other regions, little people more broadly, but whatever you call them, the message stays the same. They are not to be trifled with. Small doesn't mean harmless. In Oregon's tribal stories, these beings aren't cute forest sprites or helpful gnome-like sidekicks. They are powerful, private, and deeply territorial. Think less fairy tale and more, you've wandered too far into someone else's rules. The little people are described as being no taller than a child, with sharp features and quick movements, too quick. They're often said to live in dense forests, deep ravines, or places where the wind moves in strange directions. They don't build villages, they blend in. Their homes are hidden in plain sight, behind a boulder that wasn't there yesterday, inside tree stumps that feel like they're watching you. They're not elusive because they hide, they're elusive because they're better at this than you are. Tribes across Oregon, especially the Tillamook and other Salishan groups, have long told stories of these beings. Some portray them as protectors, guardians of sacred places, and keepers of ancient knowledge. Others, less so. There are tales of travelers who mocked the little people and vanished without a trace, of hunters who ignored offerings and found themselves walking in circles until sunrise, of children who wandered off trail and returned days later, unharmed but changed, quiet, staring, older somehow. Sometimes they appear to humans, but always on their terms. And if you see them, it's not a gift, it's a test. The Deetkatu, specifically, are said to possess powerful medicine. Some stories describe them helping lost or injured people in the forest, healing them, guiding them home, but they don't do it for kindness. They do it because balance matters, and if that balance is broken by arrogance, disrespect, or greed, they correct it, and they're not above trickery. One recurring tale involves a man being led off course by laughter, high-pitched, playful, just out of sight. He follows it, convinced it's a child or a friend, only to realize he's been walking in a circle for hours. When he returns to camp, everything's wrong. His fire is cold, his food is missing. No one remembers him leaving or arriving. Skeptics call it folklore, just another cautionary tale to keep kids from wandering too far. But that doesn't explain why hikers in Tillamook State Forest still report the feeling of being watched, or why people swear they hear footsteps, tiny ones keeping pace with them off trail, or why a handful of people each year leave shiny trinkets on stumps in secluded areas just in case. The little people don't want worship, they want respect. And if they don't get it, well, people have been disappearing in Oregon forests for generations. Most are accidents, a few aren't. And if the idea of small, ancient forest dwellers makes you uncomfortable, brace yourself, because sometimes the danger doesn't knock. It stands at your front door at night with eyes as black as the space behind them. Let's talk about the black-eyed children. 16. Black-eyed children. There's something deeply wrong about a child knocking on your door after midnight. It's not that it's impossible. It's that it doesn't make sense. No parent sends a kid out that late. No child walks empty streets without fear. And yet every so often, somewhere in Oregon, someone hears a knock. Innocent, polite, followed by a voice that says something like, "Can we come in? We need to use your phone." Then they open the door, and they see the eyes. These aren't just tired, glassy, or tear-stained. They are completely black. No iris, no whites, no light, as if someone scooped out the color of life and replaced it with absence. The pupils aren't dilated, they are everything. People who see them report a wave of nausea, dread, and the inexplicable urge to shut the door immediately. Enter the legend of the black-eyed children, a modern mystery that has wormed its way into paranormal lore across the country, but has found a particularly eerie footing in parts of Oregon. From Portland suburbs to small towns like McMinnville and Lapin, reports have trickled in over the past few decades. The stories vary in detail, but the rhythm is always the same. Two or more children, often between 8 and 13 years old, approach a home, a car, or a lone traveler. They speak calmly, sometimes too calmly. They ask to be let inside. They claim they're lost. They say they need a ride. They never raise their voices, and they never, ever come in uninvited. The people who report these encounters almost always make the same choice. They say no. They slam the door. They speed away. They feel wrong for hours afterward, like something brushed against their soul and found it unworthy, or maybe a little too tempting. Skeptics dismiss the phenomenon as urban legend, a digital age campfire story born in chat rooms and fueled by Reddit. The first known case dates back to the 1990s in Texas, not Oregon, and it's true that the tale spread primarily through internet forums, but what unsettles folklorists is how quickly and organically the story took root in rural and urban areas alike, including the Pacific Northwest. People began reporting encounters without knowing they were describing a meme. That's not how hoaxes are supposed to work. So what are they? Paranormal entities? Aliens in disguise? Demons wrapped in nostalgia? Or are they simply a mirror reflecting our discomfort with the innocence we no longer trust? We've all been taught to help children in danger. That's what makes the black-eyed children so effective. They weaponize empathy. They knock knowing you'll answer. And here's the worst part. They never force their way in. They wait, because once you say yes, once you invite them, what happens next is up to them. And no one ever really says what that is. So if you hear a knock tonight and a small voice asks to borrow your phone, ask yourself, are their eyes just dark from the porch light, or is something else wearing their skin? Still, at least the black-eyed children stay on the porch. Some Oregon creatures don't even knock. They just watch from the trees, hungry, tall, and just human enough to make you think they used to be like us. Next up, the Dogman. 17. Dogman, Wolfman. If Bigfoot is Oregon's cryptid celebrity, reclusive, towering, iconic, then the Dogman is its uninvited understudy, taller than a man, covered in dark fur and walking with a disturbing mix of animal power and human intent. The Dogman isn't just a creature out of place, it's a contradiction that shouldn't exist. A predator wearing the posture of a person, and unlike Bigfoot, Dogman doesn't seem to mind being seen. Scattered sightings have surfaced along Oregon's coast and deep within the timber country that stretches from the Siuslaw National Forest to the Cascade foothills. Some reports come from campers, others from nighttime drivers on isolated roads. What they describe is remarkably consistent. A large, wolf-headed figure standing upright with digitigrade legs, powerful shoulders, and eyes that reflect not just light, but awareness. The most unnerving part, it doesn't run, it watches. According to one 2004 account near Waldport, a man driving along a rural logging road stopped when he thought he saw a bear in his headlights. When the creature turned to face him, it stood upright and took 3 deliberate steps toward the vehicle. The man swore its eyes were too forward, too knowing, and that it didn't flinch even as he hit the gas. He refused to hunt in that area again. Other stories tell of campers waking up to the sound of sniffing outside their tents, only to catch a glimpse of a silhouette, tall, dog-headed, and utterly still. One bow hunter near the Santiam River claimed he found massive clawed prints around his truck after a solo overnight trip. He hadn't heard a thing, but his gear had been moved, not stolen, just touched. Skeptics dismiss these stories as misidentified black bears or exaggerated memories, which is fair. Memory is malleable, and fear tends to add inches and shadows to any encounter, but the consistency of the Dogman motif is hard to ignore, not just in Oregon, but across the country. Similar creatures have been reported in Michigan, Wisconsin, and parts of Appalachia. Always tall, always upright, always canine, never caught, and unlike other cryptids, the Dogman doesn't come with much mythology. There's no rich oral tradition, no epic origin story passed down by tribes. It just appeared, a modern mystery for a modern anxiety. It doesn't feel like something old that survived. It feels like something new that learned how to walk. And maybe that's what makes it worse. The Dogman doesn't inspire awe or curiosity. It inspires unease. It feels wrong, like a costume worn too well, a shape that's evolved to exploit our fears of being hunted in a place we once thought we controlled. But what if Dogman isn't unique? What if it's just one more shadow in a long line of misunderstood beasts, ones mistaken for myth, when they've been flesh and bone the entire time? Take the rivers, for example. Long before Dogman was being spotted on dry land, the waters of Oregon were hiding monsters of their own, real ones, ancient ones, still alive. Let's talk about the giant sturgeons, the living river monsters. 18. Giant sturgeons as river monsters. Not every monster is a mystery. Some are known, some swim beneath bridges, pass under fishing lines, and occasionally brush against the hull of your canoe just to remind you who really lives here. And in Oregon, the rivers are not just waterways, they're corridors of ancient life. Which brings us to the most tangible, most real monster on this list, the giant sturgeon. No blurry photos, no whispered legends, no paranormal fog, just a prehistoric fish that looks like it was designed by a sleep-deprived dinosaur and an angry architect. The white sturgeon, native to the Columbia and Snake Rivers, can grow to over 12 feet in length and weigh more than 1,500 pounds. That's not an exaggeration. That's a fact. They are among the largest and longest living freshwater fish in the world, some of them possibly older than the dams they swim past. Their armor-plated bodies, shark-like tails, and blunt, expressionless faces make them seem like relics from a forgotten age, because they are, and they're still here. It doesn't take long to see how the legends formed. Early settlers along the Columbia reported sea serpents in the river, long gray, undulating forms that followed boats, surfaced briefly, and then vanished. Local indigenous tribes, including the Chinook and Nez Perce, had their own names and stories for river-dwelling behemoths, often described as sacred or dangerous. Some stories describe spirits in the water, guardians of the river's balance. Others speak more plainly, giant fish that should not be angered. Modern sturgeon sightings outside of fishing circles still have that mythic flavor. In 91, a commercial barge operator claimed he saw something massive breach the surface near the Dalles. Not a whale, not a log. It was alive, he said, and it looked like it had been down there a long time. He wasn't wrong. White sturgeon can live over 100 years. They grow slowly, lurk in deep bends of the river, and rarely show themselves unless you know where to look or unless they choose to. Some have even been caught on sonar, their profiles stretching across screens like some submarine ghost. Anglers who hook one often describe the fight as more of a battle than a sport. Reeling in a sturgeon is like pulling the river itself up from the bottom. So are they monsters? Technically, no. But tell that to someone who's alone in a rowboat at dawn and sees a 12-foot shadow drift beneath them. Tell that to the swimmer who feels a bump in the current and looks down to see something with scutes instead of scales, because sturgeon don't care about what you believe. They just are. Huge, silent, patient, not mythical, but somehow still legendary. And in that way, they serve as a reminder. Not all monsters need to hide in folklore. Some are hiding in plain sight, coexisting just beneath the surface, biding their time in currents we barely understand. Of course, some stories go even deeper into the bones of the land itself, into battles between gods and creatures that shaped rivers, mountains, and myth, like the tale of a beaver the size of a house locked in eternal war with a trickster. Meet Wishpoosh, the monster beaver. 19. Wishpoosh, the monster beaver. Most people hear the word beaver and think of something harmless, industrious, charming even, a symbol of hard work and dam building. Oregon even made it the official state animal. But long before that marketing decision, there was Wishpoosh, and he wasn't building ponds. He was swallowing rivers. According to legends told by tribes of the Columbia Plateau, especially the Yakima and neighboring groups, Wishpoosh was no ordinary beaver. He was colossal, a creature so vast his movements carved valleys, so ferocious his anger could change the course of rivers. He lived in the waters of Keecheless Lake, far north of what is now Oregon, but his battle with Coyote the trickster sent him crashing through the Pacific Northwest landscape like a living natural disaster. The story begins, as many coyote tales do, with arrogance. Wishpoosh was said to hoard the waters of the lake, damming rivers and refusing to share. He would attack anyone who tried to approach, consuming them whole. He didn't just guard the water, he controlled it. Crops failed downstream, animals went thirsty, the land began to suffer. Coyote, never one to let a monopoly go unchecked, decided to intervene. But fighting a beaver the size of a whale is not a straightforward task. The two engaged in an epic battle that moved through the region, crashing through canyons and mountains. Their war, the story says, created the Columbia River Gorge. Every twist and turn of the waterway, every cliff and cascade was forged in the chaos of their fight. Eventually, Coyote lured Wishpoosh all the way to the mouth of the Columbia, where the river meets the sea. There, using trickery and timing, he finally defeated the monster and restored balance to the land. Some say he left the massive carcass at the river's end. Others claim the beaver's body became an island, or perhaps even vanished into the waves, waiting. It's easy to call this myth, and it is, but it's also geography. The Columbia River does move in strange ways. The land surrounding it bears the scars of ancient floods and glacial shifts. Wishpoosh may not have existed in flesh and blood, but something about the story echoes real forces, ancient megafauna, tectonic violence, and the very human need to explain the unexplainable through character. And even today, people claim to see things along the river they can't explain: massive wakes with no boat, shadows that seem too smooth to be debris. Some say Wishpoosh is a metaphor. Others whisper that he was real and that the bones of something very large still lie at the mouth of the Columbia, buried beneath silt and time. One thing is certain: the river remembers. And if Wishpoosh was a guardian of water, the next creature takes that to a much darker extreme: a horned spirit, a drowning beast, a thing that waits in still water, not to protect it, but to own it. Its name is Amhuluk, and its story is far less forgiving. 20. Amhuluk. The forests west of Forest Grove, Oregon are not just quiet, they're unnaturally so. The further you move from the edge of town, the more the world seems to soften. Trees grow older and denser, light feels thinner, and the water still, deep, waiting. This is where the stories of Amhuluk live, in the traditions of the Kalapuya people, especially those from the Tualatin Valley. Amhuluk is no ambiguous legend. He is a horned, water-dwelling spirit, a creature with immense power and a singular obsession: drowning. He doesn't chase, he doesn't roar, he waits, hidden in ponds, swamps, and shadowed pools, always watching, always patient. Descriptions of Amhuluk vary, but most agree on the fundamentals. He is large, covered in slick, dark skin, and crowned with sharp, curved horns. Some say he resembles a massive, malformed elk. Others say he is more reptilian, dragon-like even. But in all accounts, his domain is the water. His method is always the same: lure, pull, and vanish. The Kalapuya didn't speak of Amhuluk as legend, they spoke of him as warning. Parents told children to stay away from still water. Hunters were wary of isolated pools in the woods, no matter how thirsty they were. There was no ritual to appease Amhuluk, no offering that would guarantee safety. The best way to survive was not to be noticed. In one version of the tale, Amhuluk is said to have dragged three brothers into a mountain lake near Forked Mountain. The first two were taken silently. The third managed to crawl out, only to be haunted by dreams of horns and cold hands for the rest of his life. He refused to speak near water ever again. Of course, in modern times, stories like this are written off as metaphor, warnings about drowning wrapped in folklore. But the strange thing about Amhuluk is how the sense of presence remains. Even today, hikers exploring the Coast Range occasionally report unsettling feelings near certain ponds: sudden chills, pressure behind the eyes, the urge to leave without knowing why. Some speak of hearing splashes with no cause, or seeing concentric ripples radiate outward from perfectly still water, as if something just sank beneath the surface. No creature has ever been caught, no photograph taken, but something remains in those places, not just a memory, but a territory. And like many spirits in Oregon lore, Amhuluk doesn't need you to believe in him to act. He only needs you to stand too close. And as if that weren't enough, southeastern Oregon carries its own brand of aquatic horror, one that blends innocence with malice and childhood with myth. A creature that cries like a baby, lures like a siren, and punishes curiosity with vanishing. Next, the water babies of the high desert. 21. Water babies, Mpakniwat, in the arid reaches of southeastern Oregon, where the land flattens into sagebrush and silence. The rivers don't whisper, they remember. Here, along the edges of the high desert, in the ancestral homelands of the northern Paiute, lives one of Oregon's most haunting entities, the water babies, or Pakniwat. The name sounds harmless, gentle even, but no one who hears them ever forgets it. According to Paiute oral tradition, water babies are small, childlike water spirits that dwell in lakes, rivers, and springs. On the surface, they resemble human infants, soft, fragile, helpless, but that's the trick. That's the bait. They cry like children. They echo through canyons and across still water, especially at dusk or after dark. The sound is unmistakable, not animal, not wind, but unmistakably human and unmistakably young. And if you follow the sound, you don't come back. The stories vary. Some say the water babies are vengeful spirits of drowned infants, taken too soon by injustice or accident. Others believe they are a race of ancient beings tied to the spirit world, protective of sacred waters, and enraged by disrespect. A few tales describe them as shapeshifters, sometimes appearing as children, other times as scaled or fish-like creatures with red eyes and jagged teeth. But the constant thread in every version is this: if you hear the crying, do not investigate, do not search, do not answer. Payakniwat legends are especially associated with places like Pyramid Lake just across the Nevada border, but the Paiute have long occupied parts of southeastern Oregon, and the stories seep into the soil like groundwater. Lakes such as Goose Lake, Abert Lake, and the Malheur wetlands carry whispered warnings. Still water isn't just dangerous, it's sentient, and sometimes it grieves. Modern day accounts continue, albeit quietly. Campers report hearing crying at night with no source. Fishermen swear they've seen tiny handprints in the condensation on their trucks. One hiker near Summer Lake claimed he heard giggling while filling a canteen. He turned, expecting a family nearby, and found no one. But the giggling continued just beyond the reeds until he packed up and left. Of course, many brush it off. Wind through tall grass, coyotes, lonely minds playing tricks. But those who've grown up in Paiute country know better. The water babies are not a metaphor. They are a rule, one of many in a landscape that punishes ignorance. Even scientists can't fully explain the strange acoustics of the desert lakes or why certain springs seem to echo voices. But what if it's not an echo at all? What if something's calling? And if so, what happens when it's answered? Because the water babies don't cry alone. Oregon's folklore is full of bizarre creatures built for strange landscapes. Some are tall, some are fast, and some, like the Sidehill Gauger, have adapted in ways that bend both biology and common sense. 22. Sidehill Gauger. Some creatures are terrifying because of what they do, others because of what they suggest, and then there are the ones that are just weird, impossible, impractical, hilarious, until you're alone in the woods and hear something moving sideways across the hill behind you, perfectly balanced, never slipping, never falling. That's when you remember the Sidehill Gauger, a legend born from America's lumber camps and logging folklore. The Sidehill Gauger is Oregon's version of a tall tale that stretches across the northern woods, from Maine to Minnesota and deep into the mossy timberlands of the Pacific Northwest. The Gauger isn't a threat in the traditional sense. It's not lurking in a lake or hunting in the night. It's running sideways, always sideways, because that's the only way it can. The key detail: its legs are different lengths, deliberately. The legs on one side of its body are much shorter than the others, allowing it to walk perfectly along hillsides, but only in one direction. Clockwise around the mountain? Fine. Try to turn? Disaster. Flat ground? Utter chaos. Imagine a goat, a warthog, and a wind-up toy all stitched together and told to pick a side. Oregon's loggers in the early 1900s took great delight in describing the Gauger to greenhorns, new guys in camp who didn't yet know the difference between a real animal and a setup for a practical joke. "Watch out on that slope," they'd say. "You don't want to get in the path of a left-footed Gauger. It'll roll right over you." Entire fake hunts were organized to track them, complete with strange footprints carved into hillsides and mysterious crashing sounds echoing from ravines at night. And yet, like many so-called fearsome critters, the Sidehill Gauger refuses to completely die out, Hikers in the Coast Range and Cascades have occasionally stumbled across hoof-like tracks that veer only in tight spirals. Others report catching glimpses of strange, low-slung creatures darting across inclines with uncanny ease. One trail runner swore he saw a pig thing running horizontally across a 45-degree slope, then vanish into the underbrush. He didn't report it, he just ran faster. Rational explanations abound. Goats, deer, misidentified shadows, pranksters with time on their hands. But the story persists because it's fun and unnervingly specific. You can laugh off monsters that swim or fly, but the gouger? It's designed to live in one of Oregon's most common terrains, endless hillsides. Its very existence suggests that nature found a loophole, and the result was a creature that moves where we stumble. It's hard not to admire that. It's even harder not to look twice when you hear something scrambling uphill at an angle that doesn't make sense. But if the gouger is the forest's comedian, the next creature is no joke. It waits in deep, cold water, rarely seen but always felt. A local legend whispered by campers, dismissed by scientists, and drawn back into conversation every time someone sees a ripple where no ripple should be. They say it lives in Crescent Lake. 23. Crescent Lake monster tucked high in the Central Oregon Cascades. Crescent Lake is the kind of place that feels like it was designed by a brochure. Clear blue water, towering penskias, snow-capped peaks in the distance. It's the sort of spot you go to escape from the noise of modern life, unless, of course, you believe the stories. Then it's a place where the silence might not be empty. Because if the rumors are to be believed, something lives in Crescent Lake. Something big, something old, something that surfaces when no one's looking and disappears before anyone can prove it. The Crescent Lake monster isn't as famous as Crater Lake's legends or as widely reported as Colossal Claude. It doesn't have a catchy name or a local souvenir shop cashing in. It's quieter, more local, the kind of story passed around campfires in low voices with just enough detail to make you pause before stepping into a boat. The sightings stretch back decades. Most describe a creature moving just below the surface, long, dark, and smooth. Not a bear, not a moose, not a fish, at least not one anyone can identify. Some witnesses claim to see a head rise from the water, narrow and snake-like. Others report humps breaking the surface in a smooth, rolling motion, far too uniform to be waves. The creature never roars, it never lunges, it just moves. And then it's gone. Fishermen are the most common source of reports, and their descriptions tend to match. It swam like a snake, one angler told a local blogger in 2016, but it was the size of a canoe. Another claimed he saw a shape glide under his boat so long it kept going for 10 seconds, which, when you think about it, is an absurdly long time for something underwater. Skeptics have their theories. Sturgeon, though the lake isn't known for them. Otters in formation, though that doesn't explain the size or silence. Some blame logs or underwater gas pockets. Others just roll their eyes. There's no hard evidence after all. No skeleton, no verified photos, no sonar scans with mysterious blips, but those who've seen it don't care. Crescent Lake, like so many high elevation bodies of water, is unusually deep, over 250 feet in places. Its visibility is nearly perfect, which somehow makes the sightings worse. If something's down there, it's not hiding in murk, it's hiding in clarity. Maybe that's why the monster endures, because in a place so pristine, so crisp, anything that breaks the calm becomes unforgettable, especially when it leaves no trace but a single ripple and a sense that you've just seen something no one's supposed to. Of course, Crescent Lake isn't the only place where strange things swim. Head west, back to the mouth of the mighty Columbia River, and you'll find the ocean isn't done whispering yet, because Colossal Claude might be famous, but he's not alone. Welcome to the world of the Columbia Bar sea serpents. 24. Columbia Bar sea serpents. The Columbia River Bar is already legendary for all the wrong reasons. Known as the graveyard of the Pacific, this stretch of ocean at the mouth of the Columbia River has claimed over 2,000 ships since the 18th century. It's a place where freshwater meets salt in a chaotic collision of currents, tides, and underwater topography. Add fog, wind, and shifting sandbars, and you've got one of the most dangerous maritime zones in the world. So when people see something in those waters, something long, sinuous, and moving against the tide, it's tempting to chalk it up to stress, weather, or bad angles. But when the sightings keep happening, generation after generation, and from experienced mariners, it starts to look less like imagination and more like something the ocean doesn't want to explain. Enter the Columbia Bar sea serpents, a category of cryptid that's less about one monster and more about a family of serpentine anomalies. While Colossal Claude may be the headline act, these reports suggest he's not alone. He's not even unique. Since the early 1900s, accounts have described multiple long-bodied creatures surfacing along the Columbia Bar and nearby coastal waters. Some resemble Claude, serpentine, thick-bodied, with humps and a horse-like head. Others appear more eel-like, with narrower profiles and faster movements. A few reports even describe groups of them swimming in synchronized patterns, disappearing below the surface before anyone can react. In 1937, a tugboat captain near the river mouth swore he saw two large sea creatures gliding side by side in the early morning mist. He refused to speak about it publicly until he retired, claiming he didn't want to be laughed off the docks. A decade later, a lighthouse keeper near Cape Disappointment reported seeing a writhing, rope-like shape slither across a calm bay, twice the length of his rowboat, and completely silent. Unlike many cryptids, these aren't just land-based rumors or backwoods myths. These stories come from watermen, fishermen, Coast Guard personnel, and river pilots, people who know what sea lions, whales, and logs look like. When they say something doesn't match, it means something. Skeptics, as always, have theories. Waves stacking oddly, floating kelp, groups of seals in just the right formation. It's possible, sure, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a seal that leaves a 60-foot wake in still water or rises up to reveal a narrow, towering neck before vanishing. And maybe that's the real mystery. The Columbia River Bar is one of the most monitored waterways in the U.S., filled with radar, sonar, and cameras, and yet what shows up there doesn't stay. No footage, no confirmation, just fleeting moments and eyewitnesses with the same dazed look. Maybe the monsters of the Columbia aren't trying to be found. Maybe they've always been there, slipping in and out of the fog, surviving by being just believable enough to forget, just strange enough to remember. And if you think the ocean is the only place hiding serpentine shadows, look again at the calm blue waters of Crater Lake, because down below Wizard Island, something else stirs, something even less explained, something dragon-like. 25. Crater Lake. Dragon-like shapes below Wizard Island. Crater Lake isn't just a lake, it's a trap. A perfectly calm, beautifully clear, sapphire blue abyss that lures you in with silence and then unsettles you with depth. Formed from the collapsed peak of Mount Mazama over 7,000 years ago, this volcanic basin holds some of the cleanest, deepest water in the world. There are no rivers flowing into it, no rivers flowing out, just stillness, cold, watchful stillness, and then occasionally something moves. Among the quieter and more recent accounts tied to Crater Lake is a recurring story, sightings of dragon-like shapes gliding beneath the water's surface, especially near Wizard Island, the cinder cone that juts up from the western side like the tip of something ancient, waiting to rise. The creatures are never fully seen. That's the point. They're shapes, shadows, distortions, too large to be fish, too slow to be wind, and too smooth to be coincidence. Hikers on the rim trail sometimes report spotting long, undulating silhouettes moving beneath the lake's glassy surface, just below visibility. Photographers setting up for sunrise have claimed to see sudden ripples with no wind. Some visitors say they felt a distinct pressure while standing near Wizard Island, as if something enormous was beneath them. Not close, not threatening, just there. There's no official record of a dragon in Crater Lake folklore, at least not one that uses that exact word, but the concept is deeply baked into Klamath tribal tradition. The lake is said to be the battleground between Yao, the underworld spirit who lived within the mountain, and Skell, the sky god who defeated him. The battle created the lake, and the spirits or their servants were said to remain below. Could the dragons be Yao's monsters? Some versions of the story say yes. The lake's creatures are described as sinuous, serpentine, immense, and largely unseen. The fact that modern visitors are now reporting dragon-like shapes below the surface feels less like a new myth and more like an echo of an old one, reworded for a new audience. Scientists, of course, don't indulge these stories. They chalk the sightings up to light distortion, floating logs, or shifts in water temperature. Crater Lake is famously clear, which means shadows can play tricks at surprising depths. Something small at 100 feet down can look large and strange when the sun hits just right. That's the logical explanation, but logic doesn't stop the stories, because whatever's moving beneath the surface isn't showing off. It's not trying to scare anyone, it's avoiding attention. It knows the shape of invisibility, and the people who've seen it don't walk away rattled. They walk away unsure, a little quieter, a little more respectful of the idea that maybe, just maybe, this lake still holds secrets we're not supposed to measure. And if the shadows under Wizard Island suggest something dragon-like, then maybe the lake isn't alone in holding on to its prehistoric ghosts. After all, before there was Bigfoot, before there were newspapers, the people of the coast already spoke of enormous figures roaming the forest, giants who walked upright, left tracks like nightmares, and reminded everyone that the woods belonged to someone else. They were called the Wild Men. 26. Wild men of the coast before Bigfoot had a name, before plaster casts of footprints made the local news, and long before grainy VHS tapes claimed to capture something large slipping between the trees. The native peoples of Oregon's coast already knew they didn't need blurry photos. They had memory and stories passed down like weather warnings. They called them the Wild Men. Long before colonial maps marked Nehalem Bay or Tillamook Head, the coastal tribes spoke of large, hairy beings who lived deep in the forests, away from the rivers and smoke. These weren't spirits in the abstract sense. They were seen, described, avoided, not as monsters, but as others, sentient, territorial, unpredictable. The Tillamook, Clatsop, and Nehalem peoples told of encounters with beings that walked upright, communicated in strange vocalizations, and left massive footprints far larger than any humans. The Wild Men were known for stealing food, shaking trees, or letting out long, hollow howls that echoed through the fog. They weren't evil, they weren't good, they were wild, and they had rules that weren't yours. Some stories frame them as distant relatives, older, wilder cousins who chose the trees over the villages. Others paint them as guardians, punishing those who disrespect the forest. But almost all versions agree on one thing: you don't go looking for them, because if you see them, they've already seen you. Centuries before the term Sasquatch was imported into Pacific Northwest lexicon from Salish languages farther north, the Oregon coast had its own mythology of upright forest dwellers. These stories weren't told for tourism, they were told for survival. Don't go past that ridge. Don't leave food outside overnight. Don't whistle after dark. These weren't just superstitions, they were cautionary habits baked into culture. As settlers moved in, the stories didn't go away. They shifted. Some early trappers wrote about strange forest people watching from ridgelines. Loggers occasionally found trees stripped of bark 12 feet off the ground. Hunters reported being tracked quietly, persistently, through foggy woods where no animal prints could explain it. In the 20th century, these tales were folded into the modern Bigfoot phenomenon, but the wild men weren't invented by television. They were remembered long before it. What's eerie is how universal the description remains. Hair-covered, tall, bipedal, not beast, not man, something in between, something older, the kind of creature that doesn't need to evolve because the forest hasn't changed enough to require it. Some folklorists suggest the wild men were metaphors, embodiments of the wilderness itself, a way to make the unknowable feel knowable. But others argue something more unsettling. Maybe the wild men were never symbols. Maybe they were simply neighbors, and not all of them stayed in the woods because, according to one of the oldest stories on the coast, something came out of the ocean, something massive, hungry, and strong enough to go to war with the sky itself. Next, we meet the whale, the thunderbird's ancient foe. 27. The whale, thunderbird's foe. Before Oregon had borders, highways, or towns, there were stories. Not bedtime stories, not myths in the decorative, harmless sense. These were weather systems wrapped in narrative, tales that explained not only how the land came to be, but why it still feels unfinished. And few stories capture the scale of that primal, pre-human world better than the ancient war between Thunderbird and the whale. Yes, that whale. Not the kind you'd find drifting past Depot Bay in migration season, not the barnacle-covered gray giants that photographers lean off boats to capture. No, this whale was not a sea creature. It was a force, a continent-sized body of hunger and disruption, a monster so large its death reshaped the coastline, and so powerful that only Thunderbird, the colossal spirit of the storm, could bring it down. In the stories of the Tillamook, Chinook, and other coastal tribes, Thunderbird and the whale represent more than animals. They are elemental powers, constantly in tension. Thunderbird lives in the mountains. He brings lightning, thunder, wind. Whale lives in the sea, but doesn't just swim. He controls it. He churns up floods, rips down trees, and swallows entire coastlines. He is not just a beast. He is a disruption of balance, a hungry, heaving engine of chaos. The story begins with silence, too much of it. The whale has come to land, and everything goes quiet. The animals hide, the rivers rise, the trees lean the wrong way. Thunderbird, watching from high cliffs, sees the danger, and then he dives, not into water, but from the sky. The fight that follows is mythic, seismic, and uncomfortably plausible. Thunderbird lifts the whale in his talons, shaking the earth as he rises. The whale thrashes, twisting midair, dragging thunder behind it. Some say this is what creates the jagged capes of the Oregon coast. Others say the whale's massive body crashed into the shoreline again and again, carving inlets, breaking cliffs, and birthing entire bays. Tillamook Head, a battleground. Neahkahnie Mountain, a watchtower. The whale, in some versions, is defeated and thrown back into the sea. In others, it's buried inland, its bones forming sacred sites that echo with power. Either way, the war is never said to end completely. There is no final triumph. There is only balance, temporarily restored. Some tribal elders speak of the whale not as a one-time beast, but as a recurring force, a cyclical invader who returns when nature is out of rhythm, a harbinger, not just a hazard. Thunderbird doesn't destroy the whale. He contains it until the balance tips again. Modern minds hear the story and try to dissect it. Was it a retelling of a massive tsunami? A poetic account of an ancient coastal flood? A cultural encoding of real seismic trauma passed down through metaphor? Scientists nod at that theory, especially in light of the 1700 Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, a cataclysmic event that created massive waves and reshaped the Pacific Northwest coastline, a disaster recorded in Japanese tsunami logs, but remembered on this side of the ocean, not with instruments, but with story. Still, even if it were metaphor, it lingers for a reason, because the whale isn't just about nature, it's about consequences. It's what happens when something too big, too selfish moves where it shouldn't, a disruption that can't be reasoned with, only contained. And Thunderbird, he's not a hero, he's a response, swift, violent, necessary. Some say when the storms are especially bad on the Oregon coast, when the rain comes sideways and the ocean sounds like it's arguing with the cliffs, you can feel the battle happening again, not metaphorically, literally. The sky tearing open, the sea rising up, and something immense shifting just beneath the surface. There are even those who believe the whale is still here, not dead, just sleeping, waiting, maybe buried inland, maybe disguised as some other creature, or maybe it lives in fragments now, lesser sea monsters, cryptids, shadows of the original body, broken but still breathing, which leads us to the Willamette River, much quieter, much more mourn. But even here, in the middle of Oregon's most urban corridor, there's talk of something big, brown, and bizarre lurking in the murky depths, and no one says it seriously, except the ones who've seen the big brown beaver. 28. Willamette, big brown beaver. There are monsters that terrify, monsters that inspire awe, and then, once in a while, you get one that's just weird enough to be unsettling and just believable enough to stick. Enter the big brown beaver of the Willamette River, a creature so absurd in name and form that most people assume it's a punchline, but punchlines don't swim under bridges, and they definitely don't leave wakes. This is Oregon, after all, a state that made the beaver its official animal, built an entire economy around fur, and even named its flagship university after the dam-building rodent. The idea of a giant one lurking in the heart of the Willamette Valley feels like a parody of local pride, but somewhere between urban folklore and soggy campfire story, the legend has taken root, and it refuses to go away. The Willamette River snakes through Oregon's most densely populated corridor, passing Eugene, Salem, and Portland before meeting the Columbia. It's not a wilderness river, not anymore. It carries the reflections of city skylines, the hum of I-5 overpasses, and the vague scent of runoff. And yet somehow, despite the concrete and industry, something strange still seems to move beneath its surface. The big brown beaver, according to stories whispered along boat docks and fishing holes, is not a regular beaver. It's massive. Descriptions vary wildly. Some claim it's the size of a kayak. Others compare it to a Volkswagen Beetle. Its fur is always described the same way: wet, dark, matted, like something that hasn't left the water in decades. The tail, enormous, flat, capable of slapping the river with a sound that echoes like a rifle shot. Witnesses say it doesn't act like a normal animal. It surfaces quietly, stares at you, sometimes for several seconds, then submerges without a ripple. A few even claim it follows boats for short stretches, not aggressively, just inquisitively, as if trying to decide whether you belong there, or maybe recognizing you from somewhere else. Theories abound. A misidentified seal, a rogue river otter with a pituitary problem, a mutated nutria, perhaps, all possible, all deeply unsatisfying. One Oregon City resident swears he saw it at dusk near the 205 bridge. I thought it was driftwood at first, then it blinked. He watched the creature for almost a full minute before it sank straight down, like it was never there. He didn't tell anyone at first. Who would believe a giant beaver in the middle of a city? But belief isn't the point. The creature, if it exists, isn't asking for attention. It's not rampaging through parks or flipping over fishing boats. It's something quieter, Stranger, a reminder that the line between the natural and the mythical doesn't just blur in remote wilderness, it survives in the heart of the city, floating beneath bridges, watching from beneath storm drains. And here's where the story takes a turn. Because the big brown beaver, ridiculous as it sounds, may not be a unique case, there are older stories, much older, of monstrous beavers from indigenous lore. Creatures like Wishpoosh, who once reshaped rivers and drowned valleys in his rage. What if the big brown beaver isn't a cryptid at all, but a folk memory resurfacing, a smaller echo of something vast that used to swim freely long before the dams and docks and traffic? It wouldn't be the first time something huge shrank into legend. Local folklore keeps folding the creature back into casual conversation. Kayakers joke about the beaver god. Fishermen leave out pieces of apple just in case. A Portland-based zine even ran a tongue-in-cheek guide on how to behave when approached by a rodent the size of a canoe. It's all fun until you find a set of wet tracks the size of dinner plates leading down to the shore. Then it gets quiet. The Willamette itself is deep, murky, and often underestimated. It carries secrets, like all rivers do, and just because it's surrounded by bike paths and brew pubs doesn't mean it's tame. The big brown beaver may never get its own Discovery Channel special, but that's fine. It doesn't seem interested in fame. It's watching, and perhaps more importantly, it's remembering, because the rivers of Oregon are old. They've seen creatures come and go, myths rise and fall. Some monsters get headlines, some get postcards, and some just drift, waiting for the right current to carry their story back into the light. But the Willamette doesn't hold a monopoly on serpentine sightings. Down along the state's southern coastline, near Coos Bay and Florence, locals whisper about long, undulating shapes just offshore. Humped backs, gliding motion, something like Cadborosaurus, but not quite. It's time to revisit Oregon's caddy-type serpents, because one monster in the waves was never going to be enough. 29. Caddy-type serpents off the south coast. There's something deeply unsettling about the Oregon coast, and not just because it's cold, jagged, and occasionally vanishes in a wall of fog that makes time feel like a rumor. No, the real discomfort creeps in when you're standing on a beach near Florence or Coos Bay, staring out at the gray-green horizon, and you realize how little you actually know about what moves beneath the waves, because sometimes something out there moves in a way the ocean shouldn't. Enter the caddy-type serpents, marine cryptids closely related in lore and appearance to Cadborosaurus, the long-reported sea serpent of the Pacific Northwest. While caddy sightings are most famously associated with British Columbia's Cadboro Bay, tales of similar creatures have been surfacing, literally, along Oregon's southern coastline for more than a century. And if the eyewitnesses are to be believed, these aren't isolated cases of misidentified driftwood. They are part of something much bigger. Descriptions of these sea serpents are surprisingly consistent. Witnesses speak of a creature anywhere from 30 to 60 feet in length, with a series of humps that rise and fall rhythmically above the waterline. The head is typically described as horse-like or camel-shaped, perched on a long neck that glides above the surface like a periscope. It swims with a kind of eerie smoothness, no splashing, no flailing, just a continuous undulating motion that suggests something very much in control and very much aware. One well-known sighting came from a group of fishermen off the coast near Bandon. In the 1970s, they reported seeing a serpentine creature pass within 50 yards of their boat, silent, sleek, and much faster than the current. The creature didn't acknowledge them. It simply moved by, disappearing into the mist like it had somewhere more important to be. The men were so shaken they didn't report the incident until years later, convinced they'd be mocked, or worse, ignored. Another sighting, less dramatic, but equally compelling, came from a family walking the beach near Cape Arago in the early 2000s. The ocean was calm, almost glassy, when they noticed a row of humps slicing through the surface far out beyond the breakers. It moved too fast to be whales, too smooth to be boats, and it didn't rise for air. Skeptics, of course, have their greatest hits ready: seals in formation, schools of fish breaching and rhythm, optical illusions caused by wind and tide. But those explanations begin to crack under the weight of repetition. These aren't vague, once in a lifetime sightings. They're part of a growing pattern. Dozens of similar accounts across decades, often describing exactly the same motion, shape, and eerie presence. Some marine biologists have cautiously entertained the idea that what people are seeing could be a large, undiscovered species of eel or an exceptionally large oarfish known to inhabit deep ocean waters and occasionally wash up in bizarre, decomposed forms. But that theory, while intriguing, only solves part of the mystery. Oarfish don't travel in groups. They don't swim in undulating, hump-backed patterns, and they don't raise their heads out of the water like curious mammals. There's something more going on here. Interestingly, indigenous stories from coastal tribes include references to sea serpents and water spirits that mirror the modern caddy descriptions. These beings were often associated with storms, transformation, and the deep sea's unknowable dangers. They weren't evil, but they weren't friendly either. They were guardians, perhaps, or warnings. So why the southern coast? Why Florence? Why Coos Bay? The region's geography offers a few hints. The near-shore waters drop off steeply, creating cold, deep channels surprisingly close to land. Kelp forests and rocky seafloors create an ideal hiding place for large creatures, and the near constant fog makes observation difficult even when something wants to be seen, which apparently these things sometimes do. That's the most unnerving detail repeated across reports. These serpents don't just swim by, they often pause, they look, their heads turn slightly toward boats or shoreline observers. There's no aggression, but no fear either, just a kind of silent evaluation, like a scientist observing a cage from the other side. What's more, these creatures aren't described as rare anomalies. Some locals, especially longtime fishermen and beachcombers, speak of them almost casually. They're out there, one crabber told a local paper in '98. Don't see them much, but they're not gone. And that may be the real core of the story. Not that something strange was seen once, but that it's been seen again and again, and it never leaves. It just dives, vanishes, waits until the tide or the light or the moment is right. Because in the grand tradition of Oregon's monsters, these aren't creatures trying to make a scene. They're reminders, moving ripples of an older ocean, a pre-human rhythm we keep pretending we've mapped. But the sea doesn't forget, and neither do the stories. And while these serpents may swim the outer coast, our final mystery takes us inward to the canyonlands of eastern Oregon, where rock faces hold ancient scars and legends aren't just told, they're etched into the land. This is the home of the seven devils, and their appetite was anything but metaphor. 30. The seven devils. There are parts of Oregon that feel like they don't belong in Oregon at all. Jagged canyons instead of rainforests, desert instead of moss, sun-blasted cliffs where the shadows fall long and sharp, like the teeth of something ancient. Hell's Canyon, carved by the Snake River along the far eastern edge of the state, is one of those places. It is the deepest canyon in North America, deeper than the Grand Canyon, colder than most visitors expect, and stranger than any guidebook admits, because according to the stories passed down by the Nez Perce and other plateau tribes, the canyon wasn't always here. Something had to be removed to make space for it. Something large, terrible, and hungry. Something called the seven devils, not metaphorical devils, not symbols of temptation. These were literal beings monsters in the truest sense. Some legends say they were giants, others say spirits, but all versions agree on one detail: they were child eaters. The tale begins in the time before time, when the land was still soft and the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual world hadn't hardened. In this early age, seven brothers, or spirits, depending on the telling, descended upon the land. Their hunger was insatiable, not for food, not for war, but for children. They would roam the high plateaus and river valleys, snatching the young from villages, devouring them whole, and leaving only echoes behind. The Nez Perce people prayed, pleaded, and prepared for battle, but no weapon could harm the devils. No trap could hold them. No bribe could tempt them. These weren't animals, they were forces, and the world was bending beneath their presence. So the people turned to Coyote, the ever present trickster, shapeshifter, and reluctant hero of many indigenous traditions. Coyote, unlike the warriors, didn't fight with strength. He fought with cunning. He tricked the devils into climbing to the highest peaks above the Snake River. There, using divine assistance or perhaps raw geological power, he split the earth beneath their feet. The devils tumbled screaming into the depths, and Coyote, with the help of the Great Spirit, carved the cliffs around them so steep and sharp that they could never climb out again. He left them trapped in what would become Hell's Canyon, buried below basalt walls, sealed by time. But here's the uncomfortable part: they were never said to be killed, only contained. The Nez Perce gave the area a name that roughly translates to the place of seven devils, and even today, hikers can stand on the peaks above the canyon and see seven distinct points rising in a jagged, unnatural line. Seven peaks, seven shadows, seven scars. Coincidence? Maybe. But then again, this is Oregon, where the landscape wears its myths openly. Over the years, people have reported strange happenings in and around the canyon, echoes that don't belong, rockfalls with no trigger, animal paths that stop abruptly at cliff edges. Some visitors claim to have felt an overwhelming sense of dread while standing alone on the rim, as if something unseen was watching from far, far below. Local folklore has added its own embellishments. One recurring story tells of a group of campers who heard low, rhythmic chanting echoing up the canyon walls at night, too distant to place, too loud to be natural. Others tell of children going missing in the area during the 1800s and early 1900s, cases that were never officially connected to the legend, but always quietly remembered by the locals. Skeptics dismiss it all as coincidence. The canyon is vast, remote, and treacherous. Strange noises carry through the rock like whispers in a cave. People get spooked in big empty places, that's what they say. But here's the thing about the seven devils: you don't have to believe in them to feel their presence. The land remembers, the people remember, and the canyon is still here, still deep, still sharp-edged and shadowed, still shaped like something once fell into it and tried to claw its way back out. And perhaps the most unsettling part? The devils weren't the only monsters of their kind. They were simply the ones that were caught. There are other legends, other giants, other spirits roaming Oregon's wild corners. Some of them look like beasts. Others wear the shape of people. A few of them might even walk among us, tucked just out of sight, waiting for the world to forget what it once knew. But Oregon hasn't forgotten. Not really. From the peaks of the Cascades to the depths of Crater Lake, from the haunted highways of the coast to the broken silence of the high desert, this is a land full of monsters. And the scariest thing about them isn't that they might be real, it's that they never went away.